Welcome back to Abuja Studios. The conversation around drug abuse and drug trafficking is one that has gone on over and over again. But every year, on June the 26th, the International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking is marked. And in Nigeria, and in this year, the theme this year is People First. Stop, trying to get that exact one there. Stop stigma and discrimination, strengthen prevention. And we have in the studio to help us look at this matter, the Secretary of the Nigeria National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, Shadrach Haruna. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here.
Now, the President was quoted as saying, we could not agree less with the importance of this theme now that the most vulnerable population, especially women, young people, people living in marginalized environments, high-risk drug users, people displaced by armed conflicts and natural disasters, and people in rural settings are exposed to stigma, discrimination, and exclusion from mainstream opportunities. Mr. Haruna, at the NDLEA, you guys do a lot of work, and we hear that every time, doing all manner of drug busts almost on a daily basis. But looking at this theme, people first, stop stigma and discrimination, and strengthen prevention. Why do you think that theme came forth?
Well, the theme is not new in drug enforcement and drug policy, drug control issues. In fact, it is part and parcel of what NDLEA does. It's actually it's a segment of drug demand reduction, which of course has to balance with drug supply reduction. And when we have people first, what that means is human rights approach to drug policy, drug control. And what that means is anyone who is drug dependent or is a user should be seen as somebody who needs a support, who needs to be counseled, who need to be treated with sympathy and empathy. So it is not a criminal, as it were, to say that such a person should not be given treatment or he should be seen as an outcast. He is not. But what we do in NDLEA is actually, because we're first responder to issues of drug enforcement, we come across drug users, we come across those who are dependent on drugs, and we provide psychosocial counseling to them. We have rehabilitations where we bring in such people for treatment. So what we are saying, or what the theme is saying now, is everyone, including family members, should also show that empathy and sympathy to these people who are drug dependents. They should not be seen as an outcast and dealt with. Because some families just say, oh, well, this one is a drug user. We shouldn't have him in the house. That will exacerbate the problem. That will cause a lot of harm to that individual. So to reduce that harm, you have to be supportive and see how you can treat that individual.
Let's look at that matter of support that you talked about. A 2018 survey said people aged between 15 and 60 are involved in substance abuse. Yeah. Now, that's a 2018 survey, and over time, that number has been there. It's been quoted profusely by a lot of people. But there was, in relation to something you said, demand reduction and supply reduction. Why would you think that people of age 15 to 60 in Nigeria, about 42 point something million, if I remember correctly,
4.3 million, yes,
are into substance abuse? Why would you think that they would be so, the numbers will seem so huge in our space?
Well, that's a question for sociologists to actually unearth this thing. And we've conducted a research, really. In fact, that's a bracket which you have taken. But of course, you can imagine those above that age who are still into drugs and those below that age also using drugs. Because we have seen clearly that drug is not limited to that age group alone. And then there's that group, again, that are into drug, which we have not really taken cognizance of. So the push and pull factors to drug use is something that we have also been trying to find out, and part of what we've seen is actually poverty, lack of employment, and of course seeing some people who are despondent or people who don't really have anything, they just feel that they have no future anymore. These are some of them, but of course, largely it has to do with maybe their biological makeup, which of course made them to be predisposed to drug use. So there are so many issues to that, but of course, one cannot really point out an issue. Of course, we know that there's peer pressure as well. Peer pressure is a significant factor where even if you don't really want to do it, for instance, you're in school and then you want to belong to a particular group, you use drugs, not necessarily because you really want to use it. So these are some of the sociological factors that actually exacerbate drug use in the country. And having a country like Nigeria with a huge population, you should expect that, yes, the number of drug users will also be significantly high as well. So we're trying to do that. And the figure you mentioned, which is 2018 research work, to us is becoming obsolete. And in the last 29 months, the effort of the agency is something that we want to measure, to see whether we have made an impact or not.
So is that measurement on now? Are you?
Well, we're trying to commission a research, and of course, it's capital intensive. We're trying to do that because if we want to do a research, we want to do something that is verifiable, evidence-based, to see how far NDLEA has made an impact in the last 29 months.
Well, I'd like to encourage you that if you finally are able to get that report done and you find out that it doesn't look like you've moved the needle, I said do not be discouraged, because at least we know that it does appear that the NDLEA is now making efforts to give a weekly report of its own activities, and you find out that, I mean, we can expect to see this every Sunday. For instance, I mean, on Sundays, on our own bulletin at least, we always have a story on the NDLEA and the effort that they have made so far, you know, bursting people, say, at the airport. And sometimes I just ask myself when I see those stories, is it that people are not learning? that, you know, you cannot keep using the same methods. You think that, I mean, these people who were caught the last time, you think they didn't try to conceal it properly or what? Why are you still attempting? But this is what we see. That, you know, the more, well, I say the bird decides not to perch, the hunter also has to learn how to keep aiming properly, to make sure that they keep the bird in check. So let me ask you, because the age group which you have spoken about is the most productive years of any human being, 15 to 60, are the people whom we understand are the most affected by this. And now you're saying this year the theme is people first. Some people will say that there needs to be a balance, because what we're trying to do is discourage people from using drugs, from drug use. And I know that this education starts pretty early. I still remember drives are made by maybe Rotary Club and so to secondary schools, educating people on the harmful effects of drug abuse. And some people will say, if you now start setting up this, well, psychosocial counseling is very important and it is good. Some people think that it could also give rise to an increase in drug use. It would appear that the society is now becoming more tolerant of drug users. Do you ever fear that if we decide to go down that way, and I'm not saying we should discourage it, that it could send a wrong signaling to people who have stayed away or who might be on the verge of deciding whether or not to use drugs, and they might think, oh, well, if I do fall a victim, at least the state is there to look after me.
Yeah. Well, you're right, because we are very careful about that and very conscious of this people first issue and a human rights approach to it. We balance it in a way that will not give the impression that possession or use is not an offense. Currently, it is still an offense in our law, that if you use, you commit an offense. We have not discarded that from our law books. We're still looking at that. But at the same time, we try to balance it in such a manner that we will not disregard the human rights of the person who is using drug. In most cases, such individual is a victim, right? Is a victim of drug traffickers and drug peddlers and other things. So we try as much as possible not to give the impression that if you are a user or you are in possession of drugs or because you are addicted to drugs, you've not in any way committed any offense. You may be committing an offense, but of course we try to treat you first because we're the first responder, and we try to look at you as a human being first and foremost before we bring in the sanctions of law. So what we have done to ensure that we have that balance is to have a directorate which is charged with this issue of sensitization and raising awareness. We have a directorate which is called Drug Demand Reduction Directorate, and they do a lot of sensitization program, a lot of awareness raising in schools, like you mentioned. In fact, we're working with secondary schools and with partners to do what we call Unplug program. And this Unplug program is to catch them young, teach them to educate the younger ones, the ills of drugs.
Are you able to measure the effect of that education at the secondary school level?
Well, it's part of the research we want to do, which I've mentioned earlier, because we have gone around so many secondary schools, and we want to know the impact. Of course, we're seeing the drug reduction in secondary school, because we know that secondary school, they use drugs as well. Some of the pupils use drugs. But we have teachers who have been trained how to handle students and how to raise awareness amongst the students as well. So we also have WADA. WADA is War Against Drug Abuse, which was launched in 2021. And it's a grassroots type of program, which of course we expect that we use traditional rulers, we use homes, families, because hitherto, parents will not even take responsibility for their children. So we're trying to see how we can sensitize the traditional rulers, faith-based organizations, families to see and look out for the telltale signs of drug use in a home, in churches and in schools, and how to address such problems. So WADA has gained traction since 2021 when it was launched, that in all our commands across the country.
I'll be very honest with you. The only time I hear of WADA is when I'm in the studio asking questions. As an ordinary Nigerian, I mean, who was going about her business, I haven't heard of it on the streets or in my own community.
Well, I think maybe the media is not really carrying the message to others, because we've seen how WADA has really gone around our commanders have gone around some traditional rulers in their domain and sensitized them on issues of drugs. We've seen a lot of campaign being done in schools, in traditional rulers' domain and other places. So probably we have to stem up our media campaign to ensure that it shows everywhere. Otherwise, it is WADA that is our grassroots program on sensitization and education now. Yes. Attitudes
to drug usage. Some people will say that it does appear that attitudes are changing. And I know that this is something that the NDLEA has had to deal with, decriminalization. Because in some countries now, from what we hear, some classes of drugs which were hitherto illegal are now being legalized. And then you also find people who say, oh, we travel to this country, we're able to use this, and if you go to this country, you'll be able to use this drug. We don't know why it's still criminalized in Nigeria. How are you dealing with the changing attitudes to, I would say, drug usage, at least some certain classes of drugs in across the world?
You know, there's a lot of misconception when it comes to decriminalizing the use of drugs. A lot of misconception, because Nigerians hardly want to interrogate certain things before they come out with it. You travel to Canada, you travel to anywhere, and you say, oh, they have decriminalized marijuana or cannabis, and we're using it. But of course, you know, they have different species of marijuana. And in those countries, they have very good policy, very good enforcement and measurement standard, which they have to follow all these things. The type of cannabis grown worldwide, they have different species of them. And the species they have, which they say they have decriminalized in some of those countries, are those without tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the active ingredients that make one to something else. We have cannabis that is far, far more potent, almost 45%, 100% tetrahydrocannabinol. We can't compare to what they're saying that they have decriminalized. And in those countries, the enforcement rule is very, very strict. And not so many countries, including America, has actually said, we have decriminalized some of these drugs. None, including UK. UK used to allow the importation of cannabinol, the one they use for the treatment. But of late, they have also restricted it, because they noticed the increasing contents of cannabinol in that particular oil. But we are looking at it as, oh, some countries are making money. how do we try to prioritize commercial aspects of harmful drugs to the harm? And indeed, WHO has said the harmful impact of cannabis is far more outweighs the beneficial interest. So where do we stand? And some people are saying, oh, well, we make a lot of money from it. But it is not money we're looking for. We're looking for the health of the nation. We're looking for the well-being of individuals. But they are talking about the commercialization of drug and all those things. To me, it's a misconception, which, of course, we must also, the media should come out against it. Because we know that it is something that is wrong for this country. We can't do it in this country.
I do have a follow-up to that, but I know that my colleagues are, they really want to get a question in. Over now to you, Kayode and Bukola.
Yes, thank you, Malkwe. And just in relation to that, exactly, Mr. Haruna, there is a bill before the House of Representatives that seeks to legalize the growth of cannabis in the country. That bill specifically will allow the NDLEA to grant license, to those who want to grow cannabis sativa for recreational and medicinal use in Nigeria. I wonder what the position of the agency would be, particularly, with the current realities before us. How are youths smoke marijuana openly on the streets of many communities in this country? So what would the position of the agency be on this?
The agency is absolutely against such a move. There is no law, or there's no, when they say they want to pass a bill, it's a bill, of course. Of course, it has to be debated. We've not been called to any public hearing of that bill. And if we're called to the public hearing, we'll certainly give our own opinion about the bill. Because it is not something that the country can afford at this time, that we allow certain things for cannabis, for recreational use in the country. Even developed countries that have very effective system have not allowed recreational use of it for now. Some may have allowed for medicinal use, like Canada, which is using it for medicinal purposes and others. But even those ones being used are those without tetrahydrocannabinol. So for recreational use, it's not something any country wants to take it in a hurry, certainly not Nigeria. And the agency will go against such a thing, and the law cannot be passed without input from the public. So if an individual is putting in such a bill, of course that bill is subject to public debate, and we would certainly bring our own opinion to bear on such a bill. And I think most Nigerians, and I believe most Nigerians, will not allow that to happen. Currently, we have the law against it, and you can see the prevalence of use in the country, particularly in cannabis and methamphetamine. Not to say that you bring such a law that you say, oh, you allow it for whatever purpose, whether medicinal or recreational use. Of course, that would be a call for a country that will really become a stupor to drug use. I don't think that would be necessary. And I think that bill has been defeated anyway after the second reading, if I have my facts right. So I don't think that bill can go anywhere.
It has suffered a setback.
If any group or individual wants to sponsor such a bill, we want to hear it, and we want to go with our opinion.
It indeed has suffered a setback, but we wonder if that will be the last that has been heard of the bill. But still speaking about attitudes, following up on Malkwe's question, I wonder if the agencies, following trends. There are videos available online where youths are smoking what is now called shisha. And in the recent past, what we saw was one particular substance from the southeast that gained prominence from the southeast called Umpurumiri. I wonder if the agency is following up on such trends and if it is also deploying communication in the digital age to discourage the promotion of such, because when it continues, it gains prominence because such endorse the activities, particularly amongst youths.
Yeah, you're right, because we have seen, and we're on top of the issue, particularly the issue of shisha you mentioned. Shisha itself is just like any cigarette, but it's usually laced with cannabis and some other drugs. And what we do, of course, we do our own covert operations as well to know which area offers this type of laced shisha to youth and other people to use. Same thing with methamphetamine, Mpurimiri, which you have mentioned. And the good news about Mpurimiri is that even the communities in the east where they are producing this Mpurimiri, they're also up against it. And we're working with the communities. And that's where WADA comes in. We're working with the communities, and we're trying as much as possible to locate where they're doing it in the forest, because some of them actually manufacture this in the forest. And we have information, and we're on their track. The agency recently, if you remember, actually caught some people in VGC producing Mpurimiri there. So we know some of them are also in the forest producing this Mpurimiri, and we're after them. So it's not something that we are not aware of. We know the trend of things, we know how it's going, but of course, before you see the result, a lot of resources would have gone in. And we have invested a lot of resources to information gathering, invested a lot of resources to covert operations, and invested a lot of resources to whistleblowers. So there's a lot going into it. So we are actually on top of that. So all these issues is something that we gather on a daily basis and try to follow it up accordingly.
And just before I yield to my colleague, you were talking earlier on about data, and the agency has been providing such, even though it hasn't been sufficient as it should be. But the agency let us know that 18,940 suspected drug traffickers were arrested between 2021 and 2022, and about 17,500 of them were men and 1,500 were women. You can put that also in proper perspective. But how significant is the gender difference, you know, in this data that has been provided? And what are the variations in the socioeconomic factors encouraging, you know, men and women alike to peddle and abuse drug?
Well, one cannot say precisely why we have everyone into drugs now, but of course you know very well that if you're living in a society, and we're all human beings, and what men are doing, women are also doing. So we're not leaving anyone. It's gone are the days when you think that, okay, women will not venture into certain things. But now we have them. We have everywhere. We have them doing anything that the man is doing. So we cannot say precisely that our investigation or our focus should be on men or gender or women alone. We're taking everyone along. We're not looking at it as saying that it's only men that we should investigate. But the point there is, as we move along, depending on the intelligence we've gathered, depending on the information and the covert operations, whatever it on net is where we follow. And that is why you're seeing so many women coming in. In fact, because women are usually seen as the weaker sex by so many, of course, we don't look at it as such, and then they use them. If you see a woman, the tendency for you to feel that, oh, well, she cannot do this. So traffickers, barons use women a lot. And we know that some of them may not be users, but of course, so many of them are coming into drug use now. Right. Because if you go out there, you see so many women using drugs. In fact, recently we saw some online with the Fulani girls carrying their wares, smoking cannabis anywhere. And it shows how far this thing has permeated even the traditional settings of people and has actually affected the culture as well. So we're not looking at anybody on the basis of sex or on the basis of gender or anything. We're looking at the individual as human being. And anyone is capable of using drug and capable of selling and trafficking drug as well. Right. Just so the agency is not restricting its searchlight on a particular gender.
Well, just two quick issues, Mr. Harris.
And then on the issue of data, which you mentioned, is something that we're working on. We're working on the research, because what we bring out on daily basis or weekly basis is based on what we have done on that particular week. But the holistic area regarding how data are gathered is what we're going to do very soon, to see where we are regarding the work we have done, how far we have achieved, what the outcome of what we have done in the last 29 months, whether we have achieved enough or whether it's increasing or decreasing. We want to see that and know how to strategize further about it.
I'd like you to quickly update Nigerians, because there's been a lot of talk about that famous Ikorodu drug bust worth hundreds of millions of dollars. By way of update to Nigerians, because that was a major issue then. A lot of people were shocked, but still a lot of people wanted to see the case to a conclusion, maybe uncover those behind it and then have them out there. So if you can update Nigerians on that particular case, where is the NDLEA with that case now?
Well, let me say the case is in court, and we've gotten an order from the courts to also destroy the wares, the cocaine which was recovered from Ikorodu warehouse. We destroyed them, and it was a public destruction where we got everyone, NGOs, including the judge who actually condemned it to forfeiture and condemned it to be destroyed, to witness the destruction. The people that were caught they're actually facing trial currently, and of course we're not stopping at that, because we know the origin of those drugs that came in, and we're also working with our partners to investigate backward to see who actually was the brain behind the whole thing. So currently, the criminal matter is in court, and the investigation is ongoing. So I think that's what I can say for now. I wouldn't want to go to details regarding how we're deploying our investigation, our covert operations to net some of those people behind it, other than those ones that were arrested. And
I mean, the assurance you're given is you follow this to a conclusion, no matter who may be involved or highly placed the person is.
Absolutely.
I'd like to get you to speak to that proposal to get politicians to take drug tests. I know the chairman had spoken about it, even said at some point that, he had written a letter to the chairman of the APC to conduct drug tests on all the party's aspirants. Whatever happened to that? Was there like a pushback from the political parties, or what exactly?
No, well, you see, the issue of drug tests is not something that has been provided by law. It's a policy on a way to reduce drug supply and drug demand. What that means is not just targeting the politicians, but actually the policy is targeting everyone, including families in the home, not just the politicians. Politicians, because they're coming to the position of governance, we want to see that, yes, if they want to submit to drug test, why not? It's a voluntary action. You have to voluntarily agree to subject to drug tests. It's not something that you have to be forced by law for now. I know that the National Assembly wanted to introduce a bill. I think there's a bill currently pending in the National Assembly, but we don't know when that will come to light. But the policy behind the whole thing is to detect those who use drug early and see how we can also assist them in coming out of it. And that is the issue of these people first we're talking about.
Yeah, which is a very important point.
Human-centered approach to drug enforcement.
Right, Mr. Arruda, which is a very important point. Pardon me. Which is very important to, especially the commemoration of this year's,
yes,
like say celebration, really, just to ensure it's holistic. But for that particular case, the letter which was written to the chairman of the APC, is it that the commission didn't get or the agency didn't get a response, or you got a response from the chairman saying, well, no, we're not going to allow this happen? What exactly happened to that particular case with which the chairman?
I don't think it's just to the APC chairman alone. I think the letter was sent to everyone, including teachers in secondary schools and ministries, Ministry of Education, Civil Service Commission, Civil Head of Service as well, but people, particularly civil servants, as well as politicians.
Yeah, I understand.
In all this,
I'm referring to this particular case.
Most of them is, okay, we're looking at
what happened to this case? Did you get a favorable response or not? So Nigerians can maybe understand the thinking of the political class as well. Did you get a yes or no, or there was no response at all to this particular case, which the chairman mentioned?
Well, what we got is that they're looking at the logistic of doing that. And we have not really pushed back, continue with it, and say, because we know it's a voluntary act. And if you're not willing to come to subject to drug tests, fine. We can't force you to do that. But of course, the letter is not just to political leaders, it's also to civil servants and to schools and universities. All we're trying to do is to detect those who use drug early and see how they could be helped out of it. And indeed, some institutions are coming to us voluntarily to do drug tests to their staff, And we have done that. We've conducted that. Some who are recruiting also come to us to do drug tests. We did drug tests to all the applicants who applied for NDLEA this year. And those who are found to be using drugs, we know what to do with them. We don't arrest them, but we ask them, we advise them to go for counseling and then provide counseling and social counseling services to them. The same way, those other institutions that have come voluntarily to be screened, to be drug tested, we also detected some drug users among them. They are not to be arrested, but have to be provided social counseling as well. Because there are so many functional users, if I may say, so many functional users who are actually working. You don't see the impact of drugs on them, on the way they work, but it's good for them to come out of it so that they can put in their full potential. And that is the essence of the drug test. It's not in any way trying to stigmatize any individual. Indeed, the report of drug tests is very, very confidential. It's not something that will be made known to anybody. Of course, it's on a need-to-know basis. Some of the institutions that have come to us, we discover that so many of them, so many of their staff, are actually on drug. But what we tell them is, don't dismiss them from service. Allow them to sign in confidentially to drug treatment plan, and we will support. And if they have their own rehab to go to, of course, they can do that. So it is not something that anybody wants to use it as a punishment ground for anyone, but to see how we can help the individual.
Okay. What drug did you find the most common as per drug use?
Cannabis and methamphetamine.
That's in Purumiri?
Purumiri, yes.
And that's in a particular area of the region of the country. That's the Purumiri.
Well,
because at a certain time when
Igbo calls it in Purumiri, but it's everywhere. It's methamphetamine. Okay. It's everywhere in the north, in the southwest, in the north central, all parts of the country now.
There was a time
it's not just located to one region.
There was a time it looked as if it was the cough syrup that was most consumed across the country.
Codeine.
Codeine.
Yeah.
But let's...
Is that on the down low? Just asking quickly.
Whether it is still an issue.
Is cough syrup still an issue?
Oh, yes, it is still an issue.
Syrup.
Codeine is still an issue. But, of course, we have a policy that has stopped it for a long time. And I think the production of it has also slowed down considerably.
You know,
but it's still an issue.
Is it possible that there are some people who might be abusing substances without knowing that they are? And how do you get such a person to step out of it?
Well, I don't know, except, of course, if it's on prescription. Otherwise, if you want to use it, you use it, and you know you're using it. And that's why we have so many functional users, in the sense that those ones who are using it and still working as if nothing's happening to them. But it's good for you. If you think you are dependent on it and you need it to work, you can actually come out of it. You don't want it to degenerate to the level that you become so dependent, and it will cause a lot of harm to you and to your loved ones as well. And that is the essence of the drug test, which the NDLEA came out with.
Just a quick one. At what point, you talked about effective users, those who are using it, maybe depending on it. At what point can one say, I'm beginning to abuse this? Because everything can be abused.
Yeah.
Even water can be abused. So at what point can an individual say, it's time for me to get help?
When you know that you can't do without it.
Okay, so
when you know you can do without it, you know you're getting dependent.
Are there effective treatment, and is the NDLEA collaborating with anyone to see how this can be effective in Nigeria?
Yes, I think there's effective treatment. If you detect it early, you can actually come out of it. In fact, social counseling, as well as some form of treatment, can actually bring you out of drug use completely.
It's interesting when my colleague asked a question about shisha.
Yes.
You identified it as a drug. Is it a drug?
No. I did not say it's a drug. I said it could be laced with cannabis. Shisha is being used everywhere like cigarette, like others. But, of course, what they do now is to lace it, just like they lace Zobo. You know, if you go to these convenience centers and everywhere, you see Zobo being sold to those individuals, including tea in the market squares, motor parks. There are some people who sell special tea to their own customers. When you come in and you say, give me my usual, they know who you are. And they give you the one that is laced with cannabis. Same with pepper soup. So shisha is also laced with cannabis now. And people are taking it. And our officers are working. In fact, so many of them, they know the joints where they have pepper soup with cannabis, the joint where they sell Zobo with cannabis, or candies with cannabis.
What could be driving these innovation. I mean, beyond the business side of it, there are those who want to make money out of it, but there are those who are going to consume these things. I know you talked about the role of the family and the society and the traditional institutions, but then what is driving that desire to consume these things? And because more and more people go there to consume them.
Well, I think those who, as much as possible, they want to mask it in such a manner that they can use it like any other thing, like you buy a biscuit on the counter. You can't buy cannabis on the counter. But if it's masked in that way, you can still achieve what you need from cannabis by buying those candies or anything, or zobo, or pepper soup, or anything, and then feel the same as if you're taking cannabis. Of course, it's cannabis. And of course, you also cannot rule out completely the idea of those ones who wants to get people addicted to it so that they can sell their wares. You know, so many people want to lace it and get so many children dependent on it. And eventually they'll now become dependent and be able to sell whatever they have as drugs to them.
Okay, we're rounding out, and this will be like the last question I'll ask you, but just a word of advice. I mean, this is a holiday, people are at home and wondering, some might be planning to go hang out or something, but if you had a word of advice for Nigerians, the family, and Mark will ask the questions about growing attitude for these things, what would it be coming from the NDLEA?
Well, NDLEA wants to advise everyone to stay away from drugs. Whatever it is, if you know it is illicit drugs, stay away from it. If it is not prescribed drugs, stay away from it, including Panadol. Stay away from it when it is not prescribed for you. And for those who are already dependent on it, what we say is families should also support them. Support them to come out of it, and institutions should also support them. Because you can't have somebody who is dependent and a functional worker, and you dismiss that person without support, and the person will certainly go back into drug completely. So what we advise institutions, if you identify by doing drug tests in your institutions and come across a user who is a functional user, support that individual to take treatment, to receive treatment and come out of this drug.
All right, thank you.
So this is what we want to advise our Nigerians to do this time around. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shedrack Haruna is the Secretary of the NDLEA, and he joined us here in Abuja. Thank you for today.
Thank you.
And enjoy your holiday.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me this morning.
Samara Zeli will be back in the Salah to you too. Samara Zeli will be back in a moment. Just stay with us.